My name is Daniel, and for most of my childhood, I honestly believed something was wrong with me. Not because anyone ever said it out loud. Because they never had to. My father, Michael, and my mother, Laura, had 3 children. I was the oldest, followed by my sisters, Olivia and Sophie. To anyone looking from the outside, we were the perfect American family. Dad had a steady job. Mom stayed home for most of our childhood. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone waved to each other, and every December our house was covered in Christmas lights. People envied us. They had no idea what it felt like to grow up inside those walls. From the moment Olivia was born, the family stopped being ours. It became theirs. When Sophie came along 3 years later, I completely disappeared. Everything revolved around my sisters. If Olivia wanted piano lessons, my parents somehow found the money. If Sophie decided she wanted horseback riding, Dad worked extra weekends to pay for it. Dance classes. Summer camps. Designer clothes. The newest phones. Birthday parties that looked like something out of a movie. Nothing was ever too expensive for them. Whenever I needed something, though, the answer was always the same. Not right now, Daniel. We're trying to save money. You'll understand when you're older. As a kid, I believed them. I thought money was just tight. Then Olivia turned 16. Dad surprised her with a brand new SUV parked in the driveway with a giant red bow on top. Everyone cried. Everyone hugged. Everyone celebrated. 3 weeks later, I asked if we could replace my laptop because it kept shutting off while I was doing homework. Dad barely looked up from the television. You're going to have to make this one last a little longer. That was the day I realized something. We weren't struggling financially. I simply wasn't a priority. Mom always defended it. Your sisters just need us more. Girls are different. You're a young man, Daniel. You're independent. Independent. I grew to hate that word. It wasn't a compliment. It was an excuse. An excuse not to care. By the time I was 14, I'd stopped asking for birthday presents. Stopped asking for new clothes. Stopped asking for anything at all. Instead, I started mowing lawns after school. Walking dogs. Cleaning garages for neighbors. I bought my own shoes. My own backpack. Even my own school supplies. When Mom found out, she smiled proudly. See? We always knew you'd figure things out. She didn't offer to help. She didn't apologize. She was just happy she no longer had to spend money on me. Meanwhile, Olivia once refused to wear a dress because it was last season. Mom drove her to the mall that same afternoon. Sophie complained that dinner wasn't what she wanted. Mom cooked an entirely different meal just for her. If I didn't like dinner, there are leftovers in the fridge. The rules were never the same. Not even close. One Christmas made everything impossible to ignore. Olivia unwrapped a designer handbag she'd wanted for months. Sophie screamed with excitement after opening the newest iPhone. Dad gave Mom a diamond necklace that had her in tears. Then Mom handed me a thin envelope. Inside was a $20 gift card. Dad laughed. We figured you'd rather choose your own gift. I smiled. I thanked them. Then I quietly went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried as silently as I could. Not because of the gift card. Because I realized they hadn't spent 5 minutes thinking about what their own son might actually like. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody checked if I was okay. Nobody even noticed I had left the room. That night, staring at the ceiling, one thought kept repeating in my head. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone in this house actually miss me? I didn't leave the next morning. I stayed. For another 2 years, I kept convincing myself things would eventually change. Maybe my parents would finally notice how hard I was trying. Maybe if I got better grades, helped around the house more, or stayed out of trouble, they'd start treating me like their son instead of a distant relative. They never did. I graduated high school with honors. Dad's response? That's nice. Olivia failed 2 college classes, and my parents took the entire family out to dinner because she was under so much stress. That was the difference between us. My achievements were expected. Their failures were celebrated with comfort and support. The breaking point came a few weeks after my 18th birthday. I had been saving every dollar from my part-time jobs for nearly 3 years. My dream was simple: buy an old used car so I could get a full-time job and finally become independent. One evening, I came home from work and noticed something strange. The envelope where I kept my savings was gone. Nearly $6,000. Every cent I'd earned. I searched my room for an hour before walking downstairs. Mom and Dad were sitting in the living room. When I asked if they'd seen it, they looked at each other. Then Dad calmly admitted he'd taken the money. We needed it. I stared at him. For what? Mom answered before he could. Olivia's tuition payment came up short. We were going to tell you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That was my money. Dad shrugged. She's your sister. Families help each other. I asked when they planned to pay me back. Dad laughed. We raised you for 18 years, Daniel. Consider us even. At that moment, something inside me finally broke. Not with anger. Not with shouting. Just silence. I walked upstairs, grabbed my backpack, packed a few clothes, and left my house without saying another word. Neither of my parents tried to stop me. Neither of them followed me outside. As I reached the end of the driveway, I turned around one last time. The front door never opened. I spent that first night sleeping on a bench at a bus station. It was cold, uncomfortable, and honestly terrifying. I had less than $100 in my wallet, a backpack full of clothes, and no real plan. But for the first time in my life, I also had something I had never felt inside my parents' house. Peace. The next morning, I started walking from business to business asking if anyone was hiring. Most people told me no. Some didn't even let me finish my sentence. Late that afternoon, I stopped at a small roadside convenience store just outside town. It wasn't anything special: old shelves, faded signs, and a tiny apartment above the store that looked like it had been there for decades. An older man was unloading boxes by himself. Without thinking, I walked over and asked if he needed a hand. He looked at me for a second, then smiled. Sure. We spent nearly 2 hours unloading deliveries. When we finished, he introduced himself. My name's Frank. He asked where I lived. I hesitated. Then I told him the truth. I don't have a place anymore. He stayed quiet for a moment before pointing upstairs. There's a small room above the store. It's old, but it's clean. If you're willing to work hard, you can stay there. I thought I had misheard him. You'd really do that for someone you just met? Frank shrugged. Everybody deserves one chance. Nobody had ever said those words to me before. I started working the very next morning. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't care. For the first time, every dollar I earned actually belonged to me. I stocked shelves, cleaned floors, worked the register, unloaded trucks, and even swept the parking lot before sunrise. It was exhausting. But every night I fell asleep knowing nobody was going to take what I had earned. After a few weeks, Frank handed me an envelope. Inside was my first full paycheck. I thanked him. He looked confused. No need to thank me. Why not? Because you earned it. 4 simple words. Yet somehow, they meant more to me than every conversation I'd had with my parents during the previous 18 years. That's when I realized something. Sometimes, the people who share your blood aren't the ones who become your family. Life settled into a routine. I woke up every morning at 5:30, made coffee, unlocked the store, and started preparing for the day before the first customers arrived. The apartment above the shop was tiny, just a bed, a small bathroom, and a kitchenette, but to me, it felt like a mansion. It was mine. No one reminded me that I was a burden. No one made me feel guilty for eating dinner. No one compared me to anyone else. Frank treated me like an adult from the very beginning. If I made a mistake, he corrected me without yelling. If I did something well, he actually said, "Good job." It sounds ridiculous now, but hearing those two words for the first time nearly brought me to tears. Months passed. Then a year. I never missed a shift. I never complained. Whenever something needed to be done, I volunteered before Frank even had to ask. One evening, after we had closed the store, Frank invited me to sit outside with him. He handed me a soda and looked across the empty parking lot. "You know why I hired you?" I smiled. "Because you needed help unloading boxes?" He laughed. "No. You looked hungry." I looked down. I was. "I don't mean for food." That sentence stayed with me. Frank had seen something in me that I didn't even understand myself. He knew I wasn't just looking for a paycheck. I was looking for a place where I mattered. Over the next 2 years, he began teaching me everything he knew about running a business. Not just stocking shelves or ordering inventory. Everything. How to negotiate with suppliers. How to calculate profit margins. How to manage cash flow. How to recognize loyal customers. How to solve problems before they became disasters. He even taught me something my own father never had. Money isn't what makes a business successful, he told me one afternoon. People do. That sentence became my philosophy. Whenever customers walked into the store, I greeted them by name. I remembered what they usually bought. I helped elderly customers carry groceries to their cars. Families started driving past larger stores just to shop with us. Sales kept growing. One day Frank walked into my office carrying a stack of papers. "I've been watching you. I thought I'd done something wrong." Instead, he slid the papers across the desk. It was a partnership agreement. "I want you to own 20% of this business." I stared at him. "I can't afford that." "You don't have to." "I don't understand." "You've already paid for it." I looked at him in confusion. "With your work." I honestly didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever believed in me like that. Not once. Not even my own parents. Over the next 4 years, we expanded. First, we bought another small convenience store in the next town. Then another. Then another. Each location performed better than the last because we focused on something most businesses ignored. Treating people with respect. Employees stayed. Customers came back. Our reputation spread. By the time I turned 27, we owned 7 successful stores across the state. People started calling me a successful businessman. They had no idea that less than 10 years earlier, I had been sleeping on a bus station bench with nowhere to go. Then, life changed again. Frank suffered a heart attack. Thankfully, he survived, but his doctors were clear. It was time for him to retire. A month later, he invited me to his house. We sat on his porch drinking coffee in complete silence. Finally, he smiled. "I think it's your turn now." He wasn't talking about managing the stores. He was talking about all of it. He sold me his remaining shares for a fraction of what they were worth. When I protested, he shook his head. "I'm not giving you a business, Daniel. I'm giving it to the man who earned it." The day we signed the papers, I walked out of the lawyer's office as the sole owner of a company that had grown far beyond a single roadside store. For the first time in my life, I could honestly say I was successful. I bought my own home. Paid off every debt. Started investing. Hired more employees. Helped young people who needed a second chance, just like someone had once helped me. I often thought about calling my parents. Not because I needed them. Because I wondered if they would finally be proud of me. But every time I picked up my phone, one memory came back. The envelope. My savings. Dad saying, "We raised you for 18 years. Consider us even." So I put the phone back down. Some doors are closed for a reason. I just didn't know that one day they would be the ones knocking on mine. Nearly 10 years passed before I saw any of them again. Not a single birthday card. Not a phone call. Not even a text asking if I was alive. At first, I kept expecting it. Every Christmas I would glance at my phone for a few seconds, wondering if maybe this would be the year my parents realized they had a son. Nothing. Eventually, I stopped expecting anything at all. I built a life that didn't include them. Our company continued to grow. 7 stores became 12. 12 became 18. We opened our first distribution warehouse, hired over 100 employees, and started supplying smaller family-owned shops across the state. The money was nice, but it wasn't what made me happiest. What mattered was creating the kind of workplace I had always wished existed. Every new employee had a chance to prove themselves. Nobody was ignored. Nobody was treated as less important. If someone worked hard, they moved up. Simple as that. One Friday afternoon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Daniel, there's a family here asking to see you." "I don't have any meetings." They said, "They're your parents." For a moment, I thought she had the wrong person. "My parents?" She nodded. "And 2 women. They say they're your sisters." I just stared at her. After almost a decade. Now they remembered I existed. I walked into the reception area. The moment I saw them, I recognized them instantly. Dad looked much older. His hair had turned almost completely gray. Mom seemed thinner than I remembered. Olivia and Sophie looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, Mom smiled. "Oh, Daniel." As if we'd seen each other last week. As if 10 years had never happened. She stepped forward to hug me. I took one step back. Her smile disappeared. Dad cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself. I've been busy." The silence that followed was painfully awkward. Then Olivia finally spoke. "We've seen your stores everywhere." I nodded. "I'm glad." Nobody asked how I'd been. Nobody apologized. Nobody mentioned the day I walked out of the house. Instead, Dad got straight to the point. "We need your help." There it was. Not "we missed you." Not "we're sorry." Not "can we rebuild our relationship." Just, "we need your help." I folded my arms. What happened? Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad had lost his job 2 years earlier. Their savings were gone. Medical bills had piled up. They'd refinanced the house twice and were now facing foreclosure. Olivia had gone through an expensive divorce. Sophie had accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in debt after a failed business venture. One bad decision after another had caught up with all of them. They had run out of options. Then someone mentioned my name. And suddenly, they remembered they had a son. I listened without interrupting. When they finally finished, every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on me. Waiting. Expecting. Believing that because we shared the same last name, I would rescue them. Dad took a deep breath. "Daniel. We're family. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. It wasn't an angry smile. It wasn't even bitter. It was the smile of someone who had finally realized he didn't owe anyone an explanation. I quietly said 5 words. Family didn't leave me behind. The room fell completely silent. Nobody had expected that answer. Mom blinked several times, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. What do you mean? I looked at all 4 of them before answering. I mean that family doesn't ignore one child for 18 years. Nobody spoke. So let's not pretend this visit is about love. Dad's expression hardened. Daniel, we're trying to make things right. I shook my head. No, Dad. You're trying to survive. That sentence hit harder than I intended. Mom started crying. Real tears. 10 years earlier, seeing her cry would have broken my heart. Now. I just felt tired. Olivia stepped forward. We were kids, Daniel. We didn't know. I nodded. I know. I never blamed either of you for being Mom and Dad's favorites. That surprised both of my sisters. The problem wasn't you. It was them. I turned toward my parents. When I needed school supplies, there wasn't enough money. When I needed a laptop, there wasn't enough money. When I saved $6,000 with my own hands. I looked directly at Dad. You took it. He lowered his eyes. We were desperate. So was I. Nobody had an answer for that. For the next minute, the only sound in the room was the air conditioner humming above us. Finally, Dad sighed. I know we made mistakes. Mistakes? I almost laughed. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. A mistake is burning dinner. You spent 18 years showing me exactly where I ranked in this family. Mom wiped away her tears. We've regretted it. I looked at her calmly. Did you regret it when I was sleeping above a convenience store? She stayed silent. Did you regret it during my 19th birthday? My 20th? My 25th? Did either of you ever pick up the phone? Again. Silence. Because they already knew the answer. No. They hadn't. I took a slow breath. You didn't lose your son today. You lost him the day you watched him walk out of your house and never bothered to stop him. Mom completely broke down. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. For the first time in my life. Dad looked ashamed. I don't expect forgiveness, he said quietly. I just hoped. Hoped what? That you'd help us. I thought about Frank. The old man who had given me a room above his tiny store. He had helped a complete stranger because he saw someone who needed a chance. My parents had watched their own son struggle. And turned away. I reached into my wallet. Not because I had changed my mind. Because I wanted them to understand the difference. I took out Frank's old business card. I'd carried it with me for years. I placed it on the table. This man owed me nothing. He gave me everything. Then I looked at my parents. You owed me everything. And you gave me nothing. Dad slowly closed his eyes. He knew I was right. Without another word, I walked to the door and opened it. I truly hope things get better for all of you. But you won't be rebuilding your lives with my money. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Dad quietly stood up. He looked 20 years older than when he'd walked in. He nodded once. Goodbye, son. I didn't answer. Because the truth was. I had stopped feeling like their son a very long time ago. After the door closed behind them, I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty hallway. I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt calm. Not happy. Not guilty. Just peaceful. For years, I had imagined that moment. In every version, I either forgave them immediately or exploded with years of anger. Reality was different. There was nothing left to prove. They had made their choices. I had made mine. A week later, my assistant walked into my office holding another envelope. It was left at the front desk. There was no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from my father. He admitted that he and Mom had failed me. He wrote that every time they chose Olivia or Sophie over me, they convinced themselves they were doing what was best for the family. Over time, those small decisions became habits. And those habits became my childhood. He apologized for taking my savings. He admitted it was the worst decision he'd ever made. Then I reached the last paragraph. I don't expect you to forgive us. I only hope that one day you'll remember that we loved you, even if we were terrible at showing it. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. For a long time, I simply stared out my office window. Maybe they did love me. In their own broken way. But love without actions is just a word. Children don't remember what their parents meant. They remember what their parents did. A few months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that my parents had sold their house and moved into a small apartment. Olivia had found a stable job and was slowly rebuilding her life after her divorce. Sophie declared bankruptcy and started over from scratch. None of them contacted me again. Neither did I. Life moved forward. Every year, our company awarded scholarships to teenagers who had grown up in difficult homes. We created emergency housing for employees who suddenly found themselves with nowhere to live. Whenever someone asked why those programs mattered so much to me, I simply smiled. Because someone once gave me a chance. Frank passed away peacefully a few years later. Thousands of people attended his funeral. Employees. Customers. Suppliers. Friends. People whose lives he had changed without ever asking for recognition. As I stood beside his grave, I realized something. He had only known me for part of my life. Yet he had been more of a father than Michael ever was. That wasn't something I celebrated. It was something I mourned. Because every child deserves parents who choose them. I just happened to find mine later in life. People often ask me if I regret saying no. The answer surprises them. I don't. Not because I hate my parents. I don't. Hatred takes energy, and I stopped giving them mine a long time ago. What I regret is that little boy who spent years believing he wasn't enough. The boy who thought love had to be earned. The boy who smiled on Christmas morning even when everyone in the room knew he had been forgotten. If I could go back, I would tell him one thing. There was never anything wrong with you. The problem was never that I wasn't worthy of love. The problem was that the people responsible for giving it didn't know how. Today, I own more stores than I ever dreamed possible. I have a beautiful home. Amazing friends. Employees who have become family. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Frank gave me a room above that tiny convenience store, I close every one of our locations for a few hours. Most people think it's for maintenance. It isn't. It's for our orientation program. Every new employee hears Frank's story. I tell them about the old man who looked at a homeless 18-year-old and said, "Everybody deserves one chance." Then I make them a promise. As long as you work here, you'll be treated with respect. No favorites. No invisible people. No one gets left behind. Because that's the company I wish had existed when I was younger. A year after my parents visited, I received one final letter. This time it was from Mom. It was short. She wrote that she finally understood something she should have realized decades earlier. Children don't stop needing their parents when they turn 18. Sometimes, they need them even more. She apologized again. Not because she expected forgiveness. Because she wanted me to know she finally understood what they had done. I never replied. Not out of spite. Some stories don't need another chapter. The apology came too late to rebuild what had never really existed. But it was enough for me to let go of the last bit of anger I had been carrying. I folded the letter, placed it beside Frank's old business card in my desk drawer, and closed it. One reminder of the man who gave me everything. One reminder of the family that taught me exactly who I never wanted to become. People think family is defined by blood. I don't. Family is the people who show up. The people who believe in you before you've achieved anything. The people who celebrate your victories, stand beside you during your failures, and never make you feel like you have to earn your place in their lives. Michael and Laura gave me life. For that, I'll always be grateful. But Frank taught me how to live. And in the end, that made all the difference. If there's one lesson my story has taught me, it's this. Never let the people who fail to love you decide how much you're worth. Sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes, it's the first step toward finding the family you were always meant to have.